Okay, we're going to go ahead and start. Other people can catch up with us. Welcome to Ask Larry. I have a couple things that were asked of me, and I want to share with you guys today before I open it up for your questions and taking a look at some forms. I was asked about the new home builder warranty in the state of Virginia. So I looked it up. It's statute 55.1357. If you ever want to look it up and read it, so you just Google 55.1357, and it's called Implied Warranties on New Homes. So in Virginia, a builder has to has an implied warranty on their homes. So in every contract for sale of a new dwelling, vendors shall be held to warrant to the vendee, the purchaser, that at the time of the transfer of record of title or the purchaser taking possession, whichever occurs first, the dwelling with all its fixtures is, to the best of actual knowledge of the vendor or his agent, sufficiently free from structural defects so as to pass without objection in the trade, and constructed in a workmanlike manner so as to pass without objection in the trade. So they have an implied warranty, okay? And that warranty is for 1 year. Okay. They do not have to offer a new home builder 10-year HAL warranty. Most of your reputable builders offer the 10-year, but the question was, when do they have to tell you? And it's basically implied, and it takes effect at settlement. Most builders, when they do their walkthrough with you, will tell you about the warranty, especially if they have the HAL warranty and what it covers. Okay, so there's also other warranties that go along with it, whatever appliances they put in, etc. Now, the one difference is the warranty, 1 year warranty is actually for 5 years on the foundation itself. Okay, so it's an implied warranty in Virginia. All builders are held to that. So just a little recap of that. The structure for a year, foundation for 5, but most builders offer a 10-year home warranty, what we call a HAL warranty, on the foundation, framing, roof systems, floor systems, etc. And the coverage declines over time, but you do have it, and state law requires them to workmanlike manner accepted in the trades, which that would be up to a judge when you brought your witnesses in if you had to have a lawsuit. They also have, DPOR has a form, no number on it, but it's just DPOR for the new home builder, okay? But they only have to use that if there's actually a known material defect that would constitute a violation of any applicable building code. So they have a form. If they know the house they're selling you is defective, they have to tell you. Well, why would you buy a house that they're telling you is defective? But, you know, I guess people do if they desperate enough to get a house in a bidding war, right? So you can also, the builder could also make the sale of that new home as is. And if that's the case, there is no warranty. So if everybody agrees, they can get rid of that implied warranty. So I think the person that actually wanted that answer is not with us today, but it's now on YouTube channel for them to go back and check out. Any questions about the new home builder warranty? Most of your major builders, you know, not a problem. This is more, I guess, for the little independent builders.
What was the form number? 55 what?
The law is 55.1357. So if you want to go, if you Google 55.1-357 Virginia, it will actually bring up the statute, and you can print out the the statute.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, another thing that I want to make sure everybody understands, the disclosure laws changed in Virginia July 1st, okay? And the DPOR form, once again, no form number on it, but if you go to NVAR and download, just click DPOR, it brings you these forms. It is the new residential property disclosure statement, okay, that your seller signs when they put the house on the market. The very last line of that, listen to it. I didn't ask you to print it out, but listen to it. Represented by a real estate licensee, or who's not represented by a real estate licensee, but the owner is so represented. So this form has to be used by everybody, not just when a property is listed. And then it says the purchaser further acknowledges having been informed of the rights and obligations under the act. There used to be a form that they signed acknowledging that, you know, they had gotten everything. That form has been done away with because by statute, when they sign this form, they acknowledge that you've gone over the law with them. So remember, there are the 5 mandatory disclosures that a seller must have, plus the 19 now that they don't have to tell because they added marine clay and lead pipe and all kinds of other stuff to the disclosures this year. So please check out that DPOR site. You could actually print out the information from the site to go over with the people, but the form now says they are acknowledging that they have been informed of the rights and obligations under the act. So a little more of a duty on your part as an agent than before just getting it signed and saying, well, they signed the form, that's good enough. Not, okay. They actually did away with the 5-page explanation of this that the board had because they are acknowledging that you went over it with them. So they felt that wasn't necessary. I made a copy of it and I still use it. So, okay. Any questions about that form? Okay, well, I've gotten quite a few inquiries about the appraisal contingency. 3 or 4 people stopped into the office this week because they just did not understand it. So I want you to go to your contracts package that you downloaded before. It said July 1, 2020. If you look at that package, I want you to remove page 16, where it starts with the conventional financing addendum, unless that page at the bottom says 720. They had the old one in this package. You can't go by that form anymore. Don't use that form. I want you to go to page 75 and 76 of the basic Back to Basics contract package that you downloaded when we first started. Does everyone have it? Okay. So page 75 and 76 replace page 16 and 17, whatever, with the new form. So I want to take a look at the conventional financing and appraisal contingency addendum, but we're only going to deal with appraisal, which is on page 76. Okay. Because this has changed and you've got to be on top of it. So let's just go through this one. The contract is contingent or is not contingent upon an appraisal pursuant to this paragraph. Buyer shall have until 9 p.m. They're saying minimum of 21 days. I try for 30 just to make sure that we can get appraisers out there with this COVID stuff, okay? Following the date of ratification to obtain an appraisal. If neither box is checked, this contract is contingent upon an appraisal pursuant to this paragraph, and the appraisal deadline is the financing deadline set forth above. Buyer shall deliver notice to seller by the appraisal deadline as follows. The appraisal contingency notice. This is a new form, okay? It is a new form. It is on page 74 of your package, okay? We'll take a look at it, but you do have to use this appraisal contingency notice form now with financing, okay? So A, the appraisal is equal to or greater than the sales price. Contingency is satisfied and removed, and move on to settlement. B, buyer elects to proceed with consummation of this contract without regard to appraisal. Contingency is removed. C, the appraisal is equal to or greater than the sales price, but the buyer elects not to proceed with the consummation of this contract because either one, does not satisfy lender's requirements, or two, the appraisal does not allow for the specified financing, or three, property is inadequate collateral. So when this appraisal comes in, even though the appraiser assigned the value that everybody was looking, that doesn't mean that the lender has to accept it. They have an appraisal reviewer at the lenders. So they can say, even though you have a good appraisal from the appraiser, turn it down because they don't want to make the loan, okay? So remember, the appraiser is working for the lender. They're not working for the buyer. They're not working for the seller, okay? Even though the buyer's paying for it and the buyer is entitled to a copy of the report because of the Fair Credit Act, doesn't mean that the appraiser's out there trying to get them the price they want so they can settle. So the appraiser underwriter might look at this and say, or reviewer might say, look, I've already had 3 other appraisals in that same immediate area, and none of them have been close to this high. And they can ask for an explanation from the appraiser, or they can just say, as far as we're concerned, this is not adequate collateral for the loan, and they could turn it down, okay? D, the appraisal is less than the sales price and buyer elects not to proceed with the consummation of this contract unless seller elects to lower the sales price. Buyer's appraisal contingency notice. So once again, you need this notice, which is Form K-1349 on page 74 of your package, okay? Shall include a copy of the written statement setting forth, okay, the appraised value of the property and buyer's proposed sales price, which shall not be lower than the appraised value. Now, this is where another big difference. We do have the appraisal contingency form, but now we have a negotiating period built into this, just like you did with your home inspection addendum, okay? So once you send this page 74, this appraisal notice over, it's the day following receipt, because the definition in our contract says anytime anything is sent over to the other side, it becomes effective the day after. So when you send this appraisal contingency notice over, all right, that starts negotiation period. So in the event of this subparagraph 5D, parties have until 9 p.m. X number of days after buyer's delivery of appraisal contingency to negotiate a mutually acceptable new sales price. I would probably want 5 days if I was the purchaser to give us a chance to negotiate, just in case we get it back on a weekend. So we can talk back and forth. Agents can talk back and forth. Buyer, whatever to negotiate. So at any time during the negotiating period, buyer or seller may make, modify, rescind, or alter as many offers and counteroffers as desired to reach mutually acceptable terms. Buyer and sellers may agree on the terms by signing a written addendum describing the agreed upon sales price within the negotiating period. And look at these words. Otherwise, all offers and or counteroffers terminate. If you do not have by 9 p.m., if you put 5 days, by 9 p.m. on that 5th day, if you are still negotiating, it's over, okay? Everything terminates, and now you're in the buyer's election period. And buyer agents, this is mandatory that you get this right, okay? If at the end of the negotiating period, which is not when you stop talking, that's the actual 9 p.m. on the day specified, the parties are unable to reach an agreement, buyer shall have the option to void this contract by delivering notice to seller by 9 p.m. X number of days following the end of the negotiating period. Remember, we have that notice to void a contract form that you should be using in this instance, right? Otherwise, this appraisal contingency shall be removed, and this contract will remain in full force and effect at the original sales price. If your buyer doesn't void their contract in that period, say 3 days, then they're going forward with the appraisal, which means they're going to have to come up with the cash difference between the appraisal and the sales price if they didn't void and you didn't have something in writing to change that price. Okay. So let's take a look at the appraisal contingency notice. And that is Form K-1349, page 74 of that package. The contract referenced above is contingent on the appraisal pursuant to conventional VA, whatever. And the boxes are the same. You can't choose more than one option below. If you choose more than one, then the notice is void and no force in effect. All right. So 1, everybody's happy. 2, consummation without regard to the appraisal. This appraisal contingency is removed. They say, I don't care about the appraisal. It was not contingent on an appraisal. Doesn't mean there won't be one done. The lender's still going to do one, but you're going to remove that contingency with that box. Equal to or greater. But the lender denies it, then you're going to show a denial why they said it didn't meet their criteria. But the last one, the appraisal is less than the sales price. Buyer elects not to proceed with consummation of this contract unless seller elects to lower the sales price too. Okay. You have to attach the addendum to it so that they can okay. So once you send this notice over with that 4th choice, now we're into that negotiating period, right? And if we're in that negotiating period, don't mess up. Okay? It has to be a written addendum signed by all parties by 9 p.m. on the day specified. If you're getting close and the people are not agreeing, then send over an addendum extending the time period in the negotiating period of paragraph D. Get all parties to agree to extend it before that 9 p.m. deadline. Any questions about that? Because I've had quite a few questions about it the last couple of weeks.
Larry, I'm sorry, if you can go through it again one more time. I get lost in the middle there, so.
Okay. Let's just worry about the appraisals not, say we were asking 500 to come in at 480, right?
Okay.
And it's conventional. Well, then
Yes.
you would use page 74, the K-1349.
Yep.
We would go to the 4th choice and say your buyer says, no, it's at 480. I won't take the property for more than 480. They put a price in there of 480. Okay.
Yeah.
With the appraised value. Now we have paragraph 5D in your appraisal. Negotiating period kicks in.
Yep.
So once you send us appraisal contingency, the buyer said, I want you to lower it to 480. If you have 5 days for negotiating, the agents can go back and forth, okay? And maybe they say 490 and everybody's happy, okay?
Yeah.
Well, then they would they would change this to be a sales price of $490, and everybody would sign.
Was fine.
Okay.
Okay. All right.
Okay, so, but they have the right to negotiate, all right, and reach a written agreement. So you'd have to actually have an addendum changing the sales price, right, to
Yes.
$490. You wouldn't use the appraisal contingency notice to send back. That's the starting point.
Okay. So I need
Okay.
to, okay.
That's the starting point. Okay.
All right.
But if the seller agrees at the 480, then you would send an addendum within the negotiating period by 9 p.m. Everybody signs, it's fine. If they can't agree, the seller says, no, I just can't take less than $495. The buyer won't come up above $490.
Mhm.
Then your buyer at 9 p.m. on whatever the fifth day was, if that's what you used in the negotiating period,
Yeah.
they have 3 days from that point to either void their contract, okay? If they
Or-
don't void the contract, then
Then-
they're going to settlement at 500,000, even though the appraisal set 480. They're
480.
going to have an additional $20,000 on top of everything else to settle.
This out.
So they need to void the contract. You can't just let this run thinking that, you know, we can pull out later because they didn't agree.
All right.
And that's
Okay.
a big change. That's a big change from what we had before.
Okay.
Now,
All right.
this is conventional, okay? Now I want to take a look at VA, okay? Because VA is going to be, or FHA, I'm sorry. Let's go to FHA on page 20, okay? Go to FHA on page 20 of your package. And let's
Okay.
look at the financing contingency, the appraisal contingency, all right? So down at the very bottom of page 20, if you're with me.
Yep.
Appraisal contingency procedures, all right? So 1 is the same, 2, 3, we get now, but when we get to 4, the appraisal is less than sales price, right? You see me there on page 21?
21. Okay.
Where number 4, the appraisal is less than the sales price. Buyer
Yep.
elects not to proceed with consummation of this contract unless seller elects to lower the sales price. Buyer's appraisal contingency notice shall include a copy of the statement and buyer's proposed sales price, which shall not be lower than the appraised value. Okay? But here's the difference. The negotiating buyer right to void. Remember, VA and FHA, the appraisal comes in low, they have the right to void even if the seller would lower the price. So in the event of this subparagraph 5B4, the parties may negotiate a mutually agreeable sales price. The buyer or seller may make, modify, rescind, or offer as many offers as desired to reach mutually acceptable terms. Buyer and seller may agree on terms by signing a written addendum describing the agreed upon new sales price. Buyer may void this contract by delivering notice to seller on or before either 1, settlement, or 2, buyer and seller signing a written addendum describing the agreed upon new sales price. So there is no set negotiating period with VA and FHA. There is
Okay.
with conventional, not with, because the law says the buyer has the right to void if the appraisal comes in less
Comes on
anytime
this.
up to settlement.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay.
So it's really in the buyers in the driver's seat with that one.
Okay.
Even though they bring the price down.
If they are willing to bring the price down, the buyer can still say, no, I don't want to do
Okay.
that.
Okay.
Okay. For whatever reason. It may have just gotten cold feet, you know.
Thank you.
Any questions about the difference between the forms? Because it looks the same, but it's a little different.
Different. Yeah.
Okay. And the same way with the VA, the language is the same in the VA. Conventional is a negotiating period with set time frames and requires a notice to void. And that's in that third part of it. This buyer can void any time up until the time they agree.
I agree.
Okay. So if they do agree to a price where they're going to have to pay a little bit, say it was 500,000, it came in at 495, they agree to 497.5, then the buyer is going to bring an additional $2,500 plus the down payment under VA and FHA, which probably a lot less than under conventional where you're putting down quite a bit more money.
Okay.
Okay. So I've been getting people getting confused between conventional and FHA and still going with the old appraisal form terms because that's what they were used to. You can't do that. Okay. Remember I said always check the bottom of the forms, see the latest date of the forms that are being used. Any questions about any of that?
Oh, thank you. That's good. Good.
Okay. Now, before I take a look at the lead-based paint disclosure forms that we were going to discuss today, I'm going to open it up to any questions you have for Ask Larry today.
Oh,
Question which is not related to this, but are we like my client had concern about sending commitment letter because he had his personal information. So he was asking me that is it mandatory to send when we send the release of the appraisal or the financing that we have to send the commitment letter? No, financing for financing commitment letter. Yeah. Is
No,
it going to?
are they voiding the contract because of the appraisal?
No voiding. It's just a notice that the financing is released now.
Well, then they're separate. They're separate contingencies. So you still need to send your written commitment. If now you only have to send a written commitment if you have received a notice from the other side that you have not sent it, and they're invoking the 3-day void period.
They have sent by email or otherwise text messages. So it's not like actual notice. So
It's a notice. If it's in writing, it's a notice.
so we have to send the commitment letter along with releasing financing notice, right?
Either that or void the contract in the 3-day period, because if you don't, the financing contingency is over. Not the appraisal contingency, but the financing. Yes.
Appraisal contingency is different, like then
Correct.
on the valuation of the property. So
They're
that's separate.
separate. They're separate things. That's why they came up with this. That's why they came up with this new form, basically where you have to use it for conventional, the notice, because it's a separate part of the contract.
The negotiation period. Yeah, I got it.
Yeah.
So we have to send the commitment letter. The bottom line is, right?
If you don't, okay, and they agree on the appraisal, then if they get turned down for their loan, they're going to be in default.
No, I'm talking about not appraisal, financing.
No, I'm saying, that's what I'm saying. If they sent the notice over that you had not removed your financing contingency, right? You have 3 days
to void.
to either void the contract or you no longer have a financing contingency. Still have an appraisal contingency, don't have a financing contingency.
Oh, okay. But what about personal thing in the commitment letter? Personal, like his credit score, his other stuff.
Well, the commitment letter is a separate part of your contract. So if they don't send a commitment letter in those 3 days, if they don't void their contract within those 3 days, the financing contingency removed. Not appraisal, but financing is removed.
No. What I'm saying is my client had that commitment letter had his personal information, like credit score and all that. So he had concern about. So he was asking me.
That's not the seller's problem. They need to get something from their lender for, in writing that says that they have this written commitment. They can remove all that other stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, I would never send my personal information to the other side. But that, there is no definition of what a written commitment letter states. So, remove the personal financial information and send over the commitment part.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions for today? And don't be bashful. Okay. It's just going to be online for everybody in the world to hear. Only if they go to our YouTube channel. Okay,
problem.
let's talk about lead-based paint.
Yeah.
Okay, we went over this paragraph in the sales contract on Wednesday last week. So Form 1036 from NVAR is the federal lead-based paint disclosure law and regulations information for owners of residential property. I use this with my cellars if it's built before what year?
Before 1978.
Okay, so you're going to use this form, right?
Yeah.
With your purchasers, just to put them on notice, right? That you've gone over what they have to do. I can go over it use this with the purchasers, so it shows that you've covered everything that is required. I'm not going to sit here and read this form to you, okay? But they have disclosure requirements for sellers and lessors, and in the first paragraph, certification and acknowledgement of disclosure, which we're going to look at the form, and that all makes sense, right? So this is just a form that you use to keep in your file, does not go along with the contract. Now, we have the first form that I want to use, disclosure and acknowledgement of information on lead-based paint and or lead-based paint hazards. And this is for sale. Now, NVAR does not have a number on that form, but it's the one for sale, okay? So we're going to go over this form. Every purchaser of any interest in residential real property on which a residential dwelling was built prior to 1978 is notified that such property may present exposure to lead from lead-based paint that may place young children at risk of developing lead poisoning. We went over last week the exemptions and the exceptions, right? And one of them was like, if it's a deficiency, well, there shouldn't be any children living there technically in their eyes. Homes for older persons, because our brain's already shot. It's not going to hurt us anymore. So it's basically for young children. So lead poisoning in young children may produce permanent neurological damage, including learning disabilities, reduced intelligence quotient, behavioral problems, and impaired memory. Lead poisoning also poses a particular risk to pregnant women. The seller of any interest in residential real property is required to provide buyer with information on lead-based paint hazards for MISC assessments or inspections in the seller's possession, and notify the buyer of any known lead-based paint hazards. A risk assessment or inspection for possible lead-based paint hazards is recommended prior to purchase. In all my years of doing this, we've had 2 times. One where when I went over this with the seller, they said yes. When they were replacing my windows, they found lead-based paint, etc. So we actually disclosed and had a copy of those reports. And then the other time, they did a lead-based paint inspection without the seller's permission and found it in 1 or 2 boards. We paid a contractor to come in and remove it. Now, the key to this is an owner could go up to the county, they could get a permit to do the work themselves. But if you're hiring a contractor, they have to be on the EPA lead-based paint removal list, okay? You can't just hire somebody to come in and start ripping this stuff down, because it has to be, the dust has to be captured, etc. when they're doing the work. So make sure you're using a lead-based paint certified EPA contractor. Now, you yourself could do it, but you have to sign the paperwork up at the county saying that that this has to be this stuff has to be captured, etc. Right? Now, every one of these have to be initial. Seller's disclosure: A, presence of lead-based paint and or lead-based paint hazard, check one below. Known lead-based paint, okay, are present in the housing, explain, which we did in that house on Ledbetter Street in Alexandria. Or two, or the second one, seller has no knowledge of the lead-based paint hazards in the housing. So they initial, right? And then check one of those two boxes. Records and reports available. Some people said, well, there were no records and reports, so we didn't bother to get that initial. They still have to initial, okay? And check.
Only seller, right?
Only, for this part, it's a seller. The next
Okay.
part is purchaser,
Hmm,
okay? So seller has provided the purchaser with all available reports, records and reports pertaining to lead-based paint or lead-based paint hazards in the housing, and listed documents below. Or they have no reports or records, you check it. But the seller has to initial both of those. If there's two sellers, both of them have to initial, and they have to check the appropriate box. You can't have a form that the stuff is not initialed and the box is checked, okay, or does not meet the law. Now, let me warn you, buyer agents, the purchaser's acknowledgement part. Unless you receive this form from the listing agent or the seller,
Do nothing.
do not have your purchaser acknowledge and send this form over, okay? That's not, the statute does not allow for that, okay?
Do they have to initial only one line or all the lines?
All the lines, everything has to be initial,
Mhm.
okay? So the purchaser has received and had an opportunity to review copies of all information listed above. Well, there was none, but still initial, okay? Purchaser has received the pamphlet, Protect Your Family from Lead in Your Home, right? Remember, there's a pamphlet that has to be handed to the purchaser. You can go online to EPA and get those, or they sell them over at the NVAR stores. And
Yeah.
purchaser has, check one below, received a 10-day opportunity or mutually agreed upon period to conduct a risk assessment or inspection of the presence of lead-based paint, or waived that opportunity, and there is a waiver form for doing that. Well, you check waive in the sales contract, right? So just get everything initial, check the appropriate boxes. Now, can the seller refuse to allow them to have the inspection? The law doesn't allow that. The law says the seller does not have to do the inspection, but the law says they have the right to do an inspection. So if the contract is being turned down, I would advise them to talk to an attorney before they turned it down just because they wanted a lead-based paint inspection. Okay. Seller does not have to conduct the inspection, but it does say that they have the right to do it. Now, they can waive it voluntarily. They can also say, we will do it in 3 days, not 10. Okay. Sales associates acknowledgments. This is imperative that you do this. Listing and selling sales associates are aware of their duty to ensure compliance with the statute, basically. These associates have informed the seller of the seller's obligations under this law as evidenced by the seller and purchaser having completed this form. If you are a buyer's agent and the seller hasn't done what they are supposed to do, you are still responsible under this form to make sure the seller does it. You can't say, well, they didn't have an agent, or you can't say that their agent didn't do it, so we just ignored it. That's not what the law says, okay? Make sure the form is done and everybody has an opportunity to do this, because this is pretty serious stuff. You don't want somebody coming back claiming it wasn't explained to them and their child now has lead poisoning, and you had them sign the form in blank where the seller would have disclosed that they had had studies done. Understand what I'm saying? That's the importance of using this explanation for them to actually read and sign and acknowledge by seller and buyer that you have gone over this and they've had the opportunity to do this, okay? Now, everybody should have signed this, be in your contract presentation, supposed to be done prior to ratification of the contract. Any questions about that?
No.
Okay. The next form they have is Form 1035. So they have a number on this one, and that is when it's a rental. Disclosure and acknowledgement of information on lead-based paint in a rental.
Yeah.
Little different, okay?
Mhm.
Little different. It warns them that the housing built before 78 may contain lead-based paint, and that it's dangerous to young children and pregnant women. Before renting a pre-78 housing, lessors must disclose the presence of known lead-based paint and or lead-based paint hazards in the dwelling. Must also receive that approved pamphlet on lead poisoning prevention. Okay. Now, the landlord is acknowledging the presence of the paint, or they have no knowledge. And if they have records or they don't have records. Okay. And lessee has received an opportunity to review copies of the information, and they have received a pamphlet, Protect Your Family from Lead in Your Home. All right? And then everybody acknowledges it, okay? So basically, there's not going to be a lead-based paint test done, but everybody's acknowledging that there is no lead-based paint, or if there is, this is what's there, okay? Now, I didn't check to see how much it costs for a lead-based paint test, but somebody gave us a figure of what they had last week. I did research, I just didn't bother to check the cost of it. They have a machine that actually can test right on site for lead-based paint. That's probably a better test than taking the chips and sending them off, because you might miss a chip somewhere, okay? Now, the other form to deal with this, okay, is Form K1033, and this is the addendum asking for the lead-based paint testing, okay? And it's for a sales contract offered on whatever date. And so it is contingent until 9 p.m. on the 10th calendar day after the date of ratification, or 9 p.m. whatever day, you can say 3 days, 5 days, upon a risk assessment or inspection of the property for the presence of lead-based paint or lead-based paint hazards. What's the difference between lead-based paint and lead-based paint hazards? Well, if they've been opening the windows up and down, the paint may not be chipping, but every time you raise it up and down, it's freeing up particles. So there could be particles in the air. There could be particles of that lead-based paint in the carpet. So if kids are crawling around on the floors or the carpet, they get that lead-based paint particles that you probably don't even see, and they ingest them. It's the same thing. That's why I like the machines, right? The house that I sold in Arlington, the first home I owned, the shingle, the tile on the outside was asbestos painted lead-based paint. So there was hazards out there. And you could see where the paint had run down the concrete foundation part, and I'm sure it must have been in the soil. So it could actually be in the soil outside. So that's what they're talking about with lead-based paint hazards. To be conducted at the purchaser's expense. And the contingency will terminate at the above deadline unless purchaser delivers to seller a written contract addendum listing the specific existing deficiencies and the corrections needed, together with a copy of the inspection report and or risk assessment report prepared by a federal or state certified lead inspector. The seller may, at seller's option, within X number of days after delivery, elect in writing to whether to correct the conditions. If the seller will not correct, seller will furnish purchaser with a written certification, federal or state certified. If seller will correct, then they're going to have it retested, certified lead inspector and or risk assessor, demonstrating the conditions have been remedied before settlement date. If seller does not elect to make the repairs, or if seller makes a counteroffer, then the purchaser shall have X number of days to respond to the counteroffer, or remove this contingency and accept the property and as is condition with respect to lead-based paint, or this contract will become void. So this was like that old home inspection addendum we had. I'll send over something to you in writing. 3 days later, you have to respond to me, and we went back and forth forever. But the seller does not have to fix the problems. The only problem with that is in future contracts, they're going to have to say what? We're going to say this lead-based paint is found. Here's the reports. I'm not fixing it. If you want my house, you're buying it with the lead-based paint. So in a market where you have people fighting over a house, okay, and it said we have lead-based paint, we're not correcting it. So buyer, if you want it, here it is. Might be a good time to get rid of properties that you had that you knew you had problems. If people are willing to take the problems and fight over it, then they can correct it when they get in. If I had a buyer with young children or even a younger purchaser that's thinking about maybe having children, I'm going to say, look, if you get into this, if there's more than one contract on this property, you've asked for lead-based paint, the other one didn't, they're probably going to go with the other one. So if you buy this property, no matter what, if it's built before 78, do yourself a favor, have it tested for lead-based paint. If you find lead-based paint, correct it. Okay? You know, why take the chance, right?
Mm-hmm.
So any questions about the lead-based paint forms that we have and when they have to be used, etc.
Okay.
So in the information for owners of residential property, it says that you do not have to do the study, but they do have the right to do one. So don't turn them down just for that, basically.
Yeah.
Any questions about anything we discussed today?
Yes, Mr. Anderson.
Okay.
If we waive the lead paint based, information form, the disclosure form, and the purchaser signs and waive the opportunity to conduct a risk assessment. Is this enough, or we have to fill out another form?
They can waive it, but you still have to use the federally mandated disclosure form.
Okay.
Okay, it still has to be disclosed. Okay. And look,
Larry,
if you-
I have
if
a
you had-
question.
wait 1 second. If you had the records and reports that you had corrected it and whatever, I'm still going to make it available to people.
Okay.
Okay. It's not like
Thank you.
it's not like other things in the house where the state law says once it's corrected, it's no longer a known material adverse fact. The federal law requires a different reporting. Okay. Yes. What was the question?
Yeah, this is Elaine. In the example that you gave where the seller wouldn't do anything, and there is still, the way I understand is that the buyer would still have the opportunity to have the test made, but pay for it.
Right. They have to pay for the test. The buyer pays for the test, not the
Right.
seller. Okay.
Okay.
But the seller doesn't have to repair anything. Okay. And the seller is not the one the seller is under no obligation to order a report and pay for it. Okay.
Okay.
But the key to it is if we get the report in and they say they won't fix it, now you got to have a new lead-based paint disclosure form because they have it. They have to say where it is and supply the reports. At
Right.
least if they fix it, then all they have to do is supply the reports, right?
Yeah, thank you much.
Okay. Any other questions?
Larry, if the house was built in 78, but maybe was started in 77, what is the safest thing to do?
I would probably still use a disclosure.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
what I have been doing.
And, I almost take it 2 years because of the shelf life of paint that might have been around. The law says definitely 78 before, but it doesn't hurt to do the form, for a house close to it. I know one of the major companies around here, got involved in a lawsuit and they were having people sign it no matter when the house was built. So it's just mandatory 78 before. There's no reason it couldn't be optional afterwards. So I would agree with you, Ingrid. I would definitely
Yeah.
do.
I always have done that, but some
Yeah.
agents argued about it because.
Yeah, they can argue all they want, but just, so, at least send over the seller's disclosure for representing the seller. If they don't want to have their purchaser acknowledge it, they don't have to. But at least now your seller has, disclosed. Protect yourself.
Okay, thank you.
Good,
But
good-
it's not
good
it's not
question.
mandatory. It's not mandatory that the other side signs if it's after 78, after January 1 of 78. Always err on the side of caution, right?
Yeah. I'll reuse that.
Any other questions, comments? Well, great. Then I will see you Wednesday at 11 o'clock, where we continue on through the sales contract. And we're going to just probably get to paragraph 20, which is a pretty interesting paragraph in itself. So I will see you guys Wednesday, and thank you for joining in.
Thank you. Thank you, Larry.
Okay. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You too.
Thank you.
Be safe.
Bye.